The transportation and logistics industry has its own set of challenges. In the hot seat, industry thought leaders take on M&A and what's driving the future of transportation and logistics. Are you ready for the hot seat?
Welcome to In the Hot Seat with the Tenney Group. I'm Spencer Tenney. It's good to be with you. Back by popular demand, with me today in the hot seat, Anne Reinke, President and CEO of IANA. Anne, welcome to the hot seat.
Hey, Spencer, I feel like I've made success in my life, that I have been asked to return to your show.
Well, listen.
The rest of my life is like a lagniappe.
I mean, we polled the entire industry, and it wasn't even close. They said, "Give us Anne," and I try to listen to the people, and so here we are.
You're a man of the people, Spencer. You're a man of the people.
I try to be. So, but since your last interview, you've got some new digs, a new mission, some new work that you're working on. So, just before we heat things up, why don't you just take 30 seconds and give us a little bit of the lowdown about what you're doing at IANA?
Sure. And so, yes, the last time we spoke, I was the president of the TIA, the brokers, the 3PL folks, who are terrific folks. Out of seemingly the blue, the Intermodal Association of North America, I will call them IANA from now on, approached me about taking over for their retiring leader. And the association represents the railroads, the ocean carriers, the 3PLs, the chassis providers, the dray trucks, and all the suppliers in the intermodal space. They made the proverbial offer I couldn't refuse. And so here we are, and I'm sitting here in my barrel vaulted office. In all sincerity, we do have a new office, a new DC satellite office. So our headquarters is in Maryland, but we have a DC space, and I can talk about that in a little bit.
We've debated on calling this episode the coup of the century. And so, We'll come back to that. We don't know how, as a deal guy, I'm very curious on how the leadership at IANA brokered this deal to get you over there. But I'm so excited about what you're doing. I think no better place to have such a great leader and such a disruptive and exciting industry as the intermodal space. And so I think they're lucky to have you. A lot of stuff to unpack. So let's jump right in. What's changed most between your previous role and what you're working on now?
Well, a couple things. So the TIA represents, as you know, a lot of folks who are their own entrepreneurs. They've started their own businesses. They've started their own 3PLs, and they could be scaled to some extent or just have started recently. But it's very much an entrepreneurial kind of new business spirit. And the intermodal industry is scaled, right? If you think about railroads and ocean carriers, these are legacy companies that have been operated for at least, in some cases, 200 years as it relates to like CSX. And so it's a slightly different feel. And in how that shapes how I approach it, we can get into, but it does. It definitely shapes how you approach it, because you can't, I would say this, 3PLs are delightful people because they are so adaptable. There's 24,000 brokers in the space, right? So it's very competitive. The 3PL is very interested in how to differentiate him or herself from his competitor. And when you have these kind of older line legacy companies, that's not necessarily what their fastest, best interest is, right? And so again, it just shapes how you perceive your role, how you approach your membership, etc.
No. So very exciting. I'm excited for you. I think you're in for an adventure up ahead. So, I think it's interesting when you come into a leadership role, you get some major issues going on. You've got potential mega mergers on the rail side. You've got tariffs that seem to be changing on a monthly basis that have major disruptions across the supply chain. All that in mind, how do you think about your membership and how to bring value to them, given all of the complexities that are in this space right now?
Yeah, so this is actually a real thing that we're dealing with, which is, so domestic intermodal market share is 5.9%. I don't know if you ever pay attention to Larry Gross, the intermodalist.
Oh, yeah.
Guy who's got all the data and he's got special algorithms and he makes magical potions and he delivers the numbers every month. So domestic intermodal market share is 5.9%. That's down from 2019 where it was about 8%. And so why is that? Well, there's lots of reasons and we can talk about it, but how can we get it back? How can we gain market share? And that's what our membership, why they turned to me, is because they felt like my predecessor built up the internal workings of the association, got it sort of in a with revenue streams and a really good sweet spot from that perspective. But we needed to be far more public facing. And so what does that look like? It's kind of multifaceted. It's advocacy. It's public relations, which and I'll get into that in a second. It's data, right? Larry Gross, our intermodalist, as I just mentioned, he's retiring at the end of the year. So can we have an in-house resource? And so it's education. How can we create the next generation of intermodal folks? So it's really, we are like, land, sea, and air kind of in a kind of way to get IANA and the industry out there.
No, I think that's great. So you mentioned the next generation. Tell us about some of the leadership programs that you have on the development side. Because, like you said, I mean, there's demographically, it's kind of an aging sector, but so it's going to be really important that this next generation is equipped and ready to be competing in this next generation. So what are you guys putting in place around that issue?
Yeah, so a couple things. One is we have a scholarship program, the Joanne Casey Scholarship Program, and that my predecessor is Joni Casey, and she was committed to this sort of next generation. And so what we do is we provide scholarships to various school supply chain programs, and they provide an opportunity for students to receive an education in the supply chain training. And so, selfishly, that our hope is that they'll get into the intermodal industry and that education will benefit us as an industry. So, we're actually now in the midst of collecting data as to where these folks end up, the ones we sponsor. And I think that will be enormously helpful as we think the trajectory of, all right, we start them here. Where do they go? How can we help them along the way? The other thing we do is called the Future Leaders of the Intermodal Program, FLIP. And the FLIP folk are those designated by their companies as sort of rising stars. And so they work for a member company. The member company has promoted them to say, I want you to take on this leadership role. And really, what does that mean? It means attending meetings, having visibility into kind of the inner workings of IANA and the industry itself, having a more elevated platform by which to observe, and then hence, I think, improve one's own takeaways to provide to the company. So it's kind of a win-win. They get a more kind of invested employee, and we get folks who want to stay in the industry.
Yeah, and this is not something you learn overnight. I mean, hopefully you make those investments and that they continue to add value to the industry as a whole. I think that's great. I think that's really important work. Let's transition to the Super Bowl of the intermodal world coming up, the Expo coming up very soon. It'll be your first Expo, is that right?
Yeah, my first in this role.
Okay.
I've been in attendance. And Spencer, my delightful insight into this is that you are also going to be there. I'm so excited.
I'm delighted to be a part of that. I think it really is exciting. The whole setting, being there in Long Beach, the port, and you can it really feels like this is where big stuff happens. And so what will be some of the highlights that folks can look forward to that are either going to be coming or are thinking about coming?
Well, so as you alluded to, intermodal is a little bit more pronounced now. And part of it is because in the merger discussion, intermodal is seen as one of the units that will benefit, right, from greater efficiencies in terms of handoffs and that kind of thing. And anything that focuses on the growth of intermodal, whether it's through efficiency or through its organic growth, is something that's beneficial to us. So great timing, A, but B, so you have everybody who is in the intermodal space who are there. We have a board member, Shelley Austin, who talks in the way of speed dating, because it's an opportunity for everyone who works with each other throughout the year, whether they're customers or vendors or just colleagues to get together and have this opportunity either on the trade show floor or around the conference, facility to get together and have a chat and figure out what's going on with their business and how they can, work cooperatively, et cetera, et cetera. But we also have some good educational content, which we've expanded over the years. And now we have the first time we have 2 sets of concurrent sessions. And we really are not creating this out of whole cloth. We're not listening to ourselves and saying, this is what we want to hear. We're listening to our members and they're telling us what they want to hear. And of course, they want to hear about AI. Who doesn't want to hear about AI? Everybody wants to hear about AI. They also want to hear about cargo theft, right? And they want to hear about recruitment, and they want to hear what the future of intermodal is and how to make it better.
No, it's a great lineup. You mentioned the fraud. That it's kind of can be kind of a demoralizing issue because you can do everything right and you're taking care of, you're being safe, and it's just like one more thing. What are some of the emerging either technologies or developments in this space that you're excited about that have a chance to combat this really exploding trend around fraud?
Right. So yeah, on the trucking side and the railroad side, there is cargo theft. On the trucking side, there may be more fraud, and we can get into the registration ways to permeate the registration system and to defraud sort of the federal government in addition to your own customers. But you're exactly right. It's incredibly demoralizing because for a while, it seemed like we were screaming in the wind, right? Like it seemed like here is this massive problem that is affecting almost everyone universally in the supply chain space. They've either been a victim of fraud or a victim of theft. And there did not seem sufficient attention to it or enforcement around it. And so one of the things that we have started at IANA is a cargo theft task force. And that task force is really for a conversation of, all right, what can we do from a private sector perspective? We know that the public sector has to be engaged. We know that they have to double down on enforcement or on legislation or prosecution or making the registration systems tighter. But what can we do from a private sector perspective? And a lot of it is about information sharing, collaboration. Ultimately, whether we as an association develop best practices, I think will be something the working group decides. I think it makes sense. Obviously, we don't want to give keys to the kingdom to the criminals by developing these things, but having the conversation around, all right, how do we best deploy technology? And there are any number of platforms out there, and many of them well, and I'm sure they've been on your show, around prevention and detection. So prevention and detection to us is like, that's the 2 things we can control. We can't control enforcement other than we can push for it, but we can push for prevention and detection. And some of that deploys technology. Some of that is like container placement, right? So if the container is placed in the lower well of the chassis, for example, that means that, it's protected more so than from those that are not in that lower well, or where the container is placed in an intermodal yard, if it's under lights next to the guard shack or what have you, like that's physical things. But then from a technology perspective, it's using RFID detectors. It's using sensors at the door of the container, that kind of thing. To notify you when a theft is about to happen or is in progress.
No, I think that's great. And I really appreciate the work your team is doing in collaboration with other groups to really try to, bring much needed attention and resources to this growing problem. So I'm curious, like what would you say, what predictions do you have for the intermodal space coming out of the Expo and into the back quarter of 2025? What are some headlines you think that we might see as an industry?
Yeah. So, I'm not going to opine on the whys and wherefores or benefits or detriments of a merger, but because of that discussion, I think intermodal will be very much a conversation point and a conversation around growth and how can we convert over the road trucks, not to take away from our competitors. That's not our point, but really intermodal is saying what is the highest and best use of the mode. And so clearly railroad makes sense in the distances that are longer than, say, 500 miles. So if you have a long distance coast to coast movement, doesn't it make more sense to deploy a railroad solution rather than an over the road truck solution? But it's remarkable how our conversion rate has been seemingly stagnant. We haven't, and part of that is the marketplace, right? Freight rates are so low in the trucking space, right? We all know that. We've been in a freight slump for 3 years. And so we have to combat that, but we also have to combat the image of reliability. And during the pandemic, there were some reliability issues. Those have largely been resolved. But here's a phrase we hear all the time, that if someone uses a truck and there's a bad trucking experience, the shipper will just use another trucking company, right? We'll use another carrier. But if a shipper uses an intermodal solution and has a bad experience, they never want to use intermodal again. And so we have to combat that. And so to me, this is a really great opportunity to raise awareness about who we are, and the fact that we have this kind of universal discussion going on. Yeah. We can be opportunistic and really shed light on it.
I would agree with you in the fact that when you have these like large transformational M&A moments, they do give license to folks to really begin to think out of the box and to think much more imaginatively about their business and from a strategy standpoint. So I hope that's what happens, because if it does, it could be really exciting for the industry, 100%. Well, let me transition a little bit. Our producer, Galen, we were talking offline, like, how did Anne get so cool? Like, where did that come from? Was it CSX? Was it US? We don't know. But, I really, in all seriousness, I really enjoy and I'm sure your members and your staff enjoy your leadership style. But I want to understand, like, where does that come from? That kind of like abundant servant leadership style that you kind of exude. Where did that come from?
Gosh, well, thank you. First of all, that's very kind of you. I would say it's pretty iterative. Like when I mean, I'm naturally maybe, a sense of I believe I'm right. And so I would like to express that. So that's probably a long-standing thing. I don't know. But separate from that, part of it is really finding what leadership style makes sense to you. And what leadership style makes sense to me is that, and I don't know, Spencer, if you and I have talked about this before, but there is a book written years ago called Humble Leadership. And I read that book and I thought, my God, that's my style. Like without having a name for it, right. That's my style. And what humble leadership is that no one person has all the answers, that you have to trust your team to understand, to tell you what their view is from their sort of level of expertise, and that collaboration makes the most sense. So to me, having that kind of level of humility, that transparency around leadership takes a lot of voices. That is where I come from. And you could argue that it's kind of a lazy way of leadership because you don't have to do everything, but that's I don't think that's my motivation. But it can be terrifying. If you're a leader who thinks you have to do everything, how terrifying is that? Because everything rides on your whys and wherefores and how you got there and what you think today. That's not the right way. It is never right to just trust one voice. So, I've appreciated the fact that if you let the right people do their jobs, they pretty much always do a good job.
I like how you qualified that by saying the right people, because it's not true unless you have the right person in the right seat. But no, I think that's a lot of wisdom right there. Well, two last things here. Number one, give us a quick just a pitch for those that are on the fence, or maybe because it's been a tough year, maybe they're having they're kind of on the fence about participating in the upcoming Expo. Give us a couple reasons why they need to make the time, invest in themselves, invest in their companies, in the industry, about why they should participate.
Yeah. So a couple things. One is the Expo is anyone you ever wanted to meet that's in the intermodal space or attendant to it. So we have folks who do everything. If you think about some of our companies who are members, they do trucking, they do over the road trucking, and they do logistics, but they also do intermodal. So you have a lot of really, really smart people who are gathered there in all sectors. The other piece of it is, as we think about growth of the sector, at some point rates are going to go up for over the road. And one key point of that too is that the number of people the drivers who want to drive those long distances continues to shrink. Now, I'm not speaking on whether there's a driver shortage or whether there isn't, but the fact is intermodal is a future solution, regardless of we believe in the merits of trucking. That's not my point. It is a solution if you're thinking about labor as a challenge. And I'd say that we're giving the most relevant content for a highly relevant issue. And I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. There really is no other conference that speaks to intermodal as thoroughly as the IANA Expo. It just is everybody in intermodal. And for those who are intermodal curious, who haven't made up their minds as to whether or not they want to jump onto the intermodal bandwagon, is a really good opportunity to meet all those people who you can find out from.
No, and I would just echo that. Just, as far as the Tenant Group is concerned, us doing M&A on a global level, the best thing about what we do is we learn so much just by, being in the rooms with people that are really making not only America, but the world move. And I would just say that the IANA Expo brings some of the brightest professionals, most tenured people who know what they're talking about in the same room. I think it's a really special place to network and a very special place to learn. So thanks for making it available and making it go. So last question for you, Anne. Our audience wants to know, what are you reading right now, or what podcasts are you listening to that really has you excited right now? Doesn't even have to be business related. What's just something that you're like, I can't put this book down. I can't stop listening to this podcast. What is it?
Okay. So I have a long commute, Spencer. So I've been listening to a lot of podcasts, and universally, my favorite one is honestly with Barry Weiss. Are you familiar with that?
Barry Weiss, remind me.
Okay.
I actually know several Barry Weiss.
Do you really?
I do.
I love that.
I do.
You know more than one. So she is the operator, owner, manager, facilitator, all of the above of the Free Press, which is her kind of media empire, so to speak. She started after she left the New York Times for a variety of reasons. And so she has a podcast that she has every week. She also has, publications that come out every day, articles on the Free Press, VFP.com. Listen, she's not even paying me and I'm just touting her. But here's what I like about her. She has guests like Amanda Knox. You remember Amanda Knox from last week? I mean, last week's episode was about Amanda Knox, she was the woman who was jailed in Italy. And then she's had Rahm Emanuel the week before. And so, first of all, it's unusual. But second of all, she is not a partisan. She's a centrist. And so she's viewing things from that kind of like moderate lens, which so many of us, I think, view everything is out of a moderate lens. And we forget that just because the noisiest folks are the ones on either side doesn't mean that they represent the majority of humanity. And so I just appreciate that, where she's just kind of like moderately common sense, bringing interesting people, asking interesting questions. There's nothing more I could say about her. Barry Weiss and Peggy Noonan are my two top favorite people.
Peggy Noonan.
Besides my family.
Ronald Reagan speechwriter.
That's right.
Well, Amanda Knox and Rahm Emanuel is quite the variety pack. So we'll have to tune in for that. And hey, thank you so much. Utmost respect for what you do and what you're about. And again, thanks for allowing Tenant Group to be a part of the upcoming Expo. We're going to do our best to bring some value there. On M&A education. That's going to do it for us in the hot seat. We will see you next time.